Welcome to another episode of Growing in the Faith, and thank you for joining me. Wherever you are, I hope you are growing in the faith. Today, I'll be talking about our faith in the time of crisis. A crisis is when an event or situation takes a very serious turn. It's not something anyone looks forward to, nor wishes for. But to say a Christian will never face a crisis would be to be in denial, and it's not scriptural. So, what should we do in the event of a crisis, and how should we deal with it? What should happen to our faith in crisis? One excellent example of dealing with crisis is that of the Shunammite woman. She and her husband had been hosts of the prophet Elisha anytime he passed by their home, as they made a place for him to stay with them in their home. Elisha wanted to do something for her in return for all her kind hospitality and told her that she would have a son. She didn't have a child at this time, and her husband was old, meaning that the biological likelihood of her having a child was very low. But Elisha's word came to pass, and she did have a son a year later. But a crisis occurred. Her son died. How did she handle this situation? First of all, she didn't fall apart. She composed herself. She took the boy, laid him on Elisha's bed in the room he stayed when he was in their house, and shut the door. Then she asked her husband for transportation so she could run to the man of God, but she didn't tell him why. So he said, "Why are you going to him today? It is neither the new moon nor the Sabbath." And she said, "It is well." Her husband wondered why she was going to see Elisha, as it wasn't a special religious day or festival. But she didn't tell him anything. She simply said, "It is well." She spoke in faith that it is well, though in reality it wasn't. Why didn't she tell him anything? Perhaps her husband's reaction would have weakened her faith. She was focused and did not allow herself to be distracted, despite the tragedy that had occurred. This was a crisis, but she kept her composure. Her faith was unruffled. She was confident that when she got to the man of God, everything would be okay. Her example shows the focus our faith needs to have in times of crisis. We also need to keep our focus on getting an answer to the situation. And it won't help if we share details with those who will not believe that the situation has a solution. It's a thin line, especially where close relationships are involved, but God will give us wisdom. Miracles don't occur when people fall apart. Crisis won't have a solution if your faith is not focused on the Lord. She kept the information that their son was dead to herself. Now, please, this does not mean we should be secretive in crisis. No, especially with those who are very close, who either ought to know or can support with counsel and prayer. But it does mean we need to be discerning how we disseminate information at such times to guard our faith. When everything is falling apart, your faith is all you have. When she got to Elisha, he sent his servant Gehazi to meet her. "Please run now to meet her and say to her, 'Is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with the child?' And she answered, 'It is well.' Again, she said, 'It is well.' She didn't tell his servant anything. Now, by saying it is well, was she in denial or was she in faith? I say the latter. It's very instructive how this woman kept any negative thing out of her mouth throughout this period. She didn't wail and shout, but said as little as possible. And what she did say was full of faith. She was full of faith, but also took practical steps to do what she believed would resolve the crisis. She took the trip to the prophet and refused to leave him until he came back with her. Even when he said Gehazi should go on his behalf, she was adamant that she wouldn't leave Elisha. He had to go with her. The lessons of this story are first that our trust in God needs to be absolute. She had total trust in God through the hand of his servant Elisha. Is our trust in God absolute? I believe this is where most of us have a challenge. We do trust God, but do we trust him absolutely? When problems come, what happens to us? The fact that the Shunammite woman did not fall apart, despite the fact that her son was already dead, showed the absolute trust she had in God. The second lesson is that we need to guard our faith when a crisis occurs. It's not just about not telling anyone about the situation you are facing, but more about your being discerning to know who to share with in a way that your faith won't be adversely affected. Every situation is different, and there is no blanket rule to follow. May God give us wisdom. Another story about faith in crisis is the healing of Jairus' daughter. The 12-year-old daughter of Jairus, a ruler of the synagogue, was dying. And he came to Jesus, begging him to come to his house so she could be healed. But before Jesus could get there, someone came to inform Jairus that the girl was dead. This was a crisis. Before, the girl was dying, but now she was dead. On hearing the news, what did Jesus say? But when Jesus heard it, he answered him, saying, "Do not be afraid, only believe, and she will be made well." Jesus said Jairus should not be afraid, but should only believe. This is the pattern for us in crisis. Put your absolute trust in God. Don't be afraid because He's in charge. But only believe. Activate your total trust in Him. Fear and faith cannot coexist. Only one can be at play in our lives. It's either fear or faith. If we are fearful, fear will displace faith. Jesus was setting the atmosphere for a miracle to happen, and Jairus' part in it was not to be afraid but to believe. Jesus and his disciples who went with him now arrived at the home of Jairus. When he came into the house, he permitted no one to go in except Peter, James, and John, and the father and mother of the girl. First of all, Jesus did not allow anyone, apart from his three disciples and the girl's parents, to enter the room where she was laid. Why was this? Well, all the people there were weeping and mourning. The Gospel of Mark in chapter 5 also records this account, and it says, when Jesus got there, he saw an uproar with people weeping and wailing loudly. You can imagine what it must have been like. This was not an atmosphere where faith could be exercised. So Jesus limited those who would enter the room with him. Just as we saw in the example of the Shunammite woman, in a crisis, you cannot be in an atmosphere of fear, doubt, or anything that will negate your faith. When Jesus told the mourners that she wasn't dead, they ridiculed him. Now all wept and mourned for her, but he said, "Do not weep, she is not dead, but sleeping." And they ridiculed him, knowing that she was dead. But he put them all outside, took her by the hand, and called, saying, "Little girl, arise." Jesus knew to whom he looked, so he wasn't concerned about the ridicule, but he made sure all of them were kept away from where the miracle was about to occur. Perhaps some of the mourners and those wailing loudly would have been very close friends and relatives of the family who also could have witnessed the girl's healing, but they were excluded because of their lack of faith. In crisis, you cannot afford to be sentimental if you want to stand in faith. If you do not deliberately ensure you are in an atmosphere of faith, the crisis may only get worse. The story ends with the girl being raised from the dead. It's instructive that these examples are about situations involving life. I guess this is the ultimate personal crisis when life is at stake. My hope is that this message will stir up your faith in these very desperate times. Jesus said to Peter that he had prayed for him that his faith would not fail. This is my prayer for you and for myself too, that our faith will not fail when it matters most, because if you faint in a crisis, you are weak. In the event of crisis, may we not be weak but strong in the Lord. I hope you have enjoyed this episode and have learned some things from it. All the scriptures referenced in this episode will come up on the screen at the end. I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, bye bye, and God bless you as you continue to grow in the faith. Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and turn on your post notifications. Thank you.